Hello, welcome to the program. This is the Black Ponderer. I'm Neil Trotter, the host of this YouTube channel. The Black Ponderer is a channel where we talk about philosophy, philosophical themes, and reread philosophical texts and provide supplementary commentary. And that continues in the YouTube comments below, if you so choose. Well, first of all, I recently moved house, so the background has been all over the place in terms of chaos and mess, but now it's finally starting to get a little bit better. It's still not the best, it's not aesthetically pleasing. This is the office area, and I apologize for not having a background with a huge stack of books or a shelf with showcasing enormous tomes. I don't give off that academia impression. I'm sorry. Not really. I don't really care about that. But that's what's going on. At least it looks a bit orderly. So there's that. We're starting to get settled here. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about this text right here. It's called The Soul of Man Under Socialism. It's by Oscar Wilde. It was published in 1891. Yes, 1891. So Oscar Wilde, very famous, popular writer. I think he's most famous for the Picture of Dorian Gray, which is a very famous work of fiction turned into a movie. The character Dorian Gray has been adopted in many forms of media. I think I actually first encountered Dorian Gray in a comic book. I think it was called League of Extraordinary Gentlemen or something like that. He's been in that comic book. That character has been used in many other contexts. Quite a popular character, and Oscar Wilde has also written many other works. I thought he was just a fiction writer, but apparently he's into nonfiction. And not only is he into nonfiction, he's into the woke. He was woke before woke was a thing, right? In terms of what we address it as today. This guy was an anarchist. He was a socialist. He was an abolitionist. Right? He is all over the map in terms of leftist thinking. Or some would argue that's beyond leftist thinking, right? It's he ain't a part of it. He's in a whole radical realm, right? He didn't call himself an anarchist, which most people who are or were anarchists didn't really call themselves anarchists. I think he called himself, or he was part of I think it's called socialist libertarianism or something like that, which was basically anarchy. Now, we don't really use that term anymore. Socialist, libertarian. I don't think that's a term that's used much anymore, but it was back then to describe what his point of view. But yeah, he was all over. He was a very radical thinker, and yeah, we gotta talk about what he wrote here, and it's gonna be pretty cool because I'm on board with the radical thinking and far leftist political philosophy. I'm all on board with that, as you know, if you watch this channel. So what we're going to be talking about, the theme is solidarity, not charity, mutual aid, right? And why you should focus on mutual aid instead of charity. These are political, philosophical concepts. They're social economic ideas, right? That's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so let me read you some quotes from this text, and this, as you can see, this is a printout. It's not a book, so oftentimes I'll quote the page. I'll cite the page number, but there is no page number here because I just printed it out because it was free, because I'm cheap. But books are expensive. That's how we roll. So I'm just gonna read you the quote, and feel free to look it up online. It's free. So, they try to solve the problem of poverty, for instance, by keeping the poor alive, or in the case of a very advanced school, by amusing the poor. Okay, who are they? He's talking about nonprofit organizations, basically, or charity groups. It's particularly significant, popular charity groups. And he's saying charity is they just keep the poor alive, and that's all they do, right? They kind of amuse the poor, but they don't really do much into trying to get the poor out of being poor, right? And that's where the distinction between charity and mutual aid comes in, right? But I'll continue reading. But this is not a solution. It is an aggravation of the difficulty. The proper aim is to try and reconstruct society on such a basis that poverty will be impossible. Right? And the altruistic virtues have really prevented the carrying out of this aim. Altruism, like, or here in the United States of America, we refer to that more like neoliberalism, which is these are terms that are thrown all over the place, and they mean kind of various things to various people. But when we talk about neoliberalism or altruism, there's ideas that come up like the non-profit industrial complex, where like you have these charity organizations that have made charity into a business, into actually a form of exploitation, where it's like people's job is to just help people in a way that really doesn't give them a way out of their situation that they're in. It's just like kind of perpetuating their situation. It's like a business model. What Wilde is referring to is like, look, instead of doing that, we need to focus on doing things that actually get people out of the problems that they're in, rather than just like putting a band-aid on the situation, that kind of term, or just providing like superficial help, temporary relief, but not like long-lasting or permanent ways to get out of their situation, right? Because, providing the ways for people that you're helping to get out of this situation will get the person that's helping out of their career path, the career of helping, right? And see, that's the problem. Like, helping is made to be this career, right? This you have a wage for helping, whereas like, no, that's not why you should be helping, right? But let me continue. Just as the worst slave owners were those who were kind to their slaves, and so prevented the horror of the system being realized by those who suffer from it and understood by those who contemplated it, so in the present state of things, the people who do most harm are the people who try to do most good. So that's pretty radical saying that. He's comparing like the good slave owners, the people that treat their slave owners nicely, rather than, no, what you should be doing is you should be, well, fuck slavery, right? Abolish slavery. That's what you should be doing, because the good slave owner just perpetuates slavery further. Even more so, one would argue, than the bad slave owner, the slave owner that treats their slaves horribly, because then you obviously see like, oh, okay, yeah, this is obviously a problem. But the good slave owner is like, well, look at, it's not that bad. Look, they're having a good life. Maybe we should just keep this going, That's where he's going. Wild. But I'll continue reading. And at last we have had the spectacle of men who have really studied the problem and know the life. Educated men coming forward and imploring the community to restrain its altruistic impulses of charity, benevolence, and the like. They do so on the ground that such charity degrades and demoralizes. They are perfectly right. Charity creates a multitude of sins. Right? So he's talking about people who kind of step up and say, solidarity, not charity. Right? Mutual aid. Right? They criticizing charity organizations in that sense. Like, they're the ones that say, like, this is a non-profit industrial complex. Those people. They're coming forward and they're criticized because it doesn't address the root cause problem. It just addresses the immediate need, but it doesn't deal with the core reason why this is happening. We're going to get back to that, those people that call out the problem in that way. But before we do that, let me read you some other quotes here. We are often told that the poor are grateful for charity. Some of them are, no doubt, but the best amongst the poor are never grateful. They are ungrateful, discontented, disobedient, and rebellious. They are quite right to be so. Charity they feel to be a ridiculous, inadequate mode of partial restitution, or a sentimental dole, usually accompanied by some impertinent attempt on the part of the sentimentalists to tyrannize over their private lives. Why should they be grateful for the crumbs that fall from the rich man's table? They should be seated at the board and are beginning to know it. Yeah, no, I kind of go on board with that, right? Because the idea is like, well, these, I'm giving them food, they're ungrateful. Why are they ungrateful? We're helping them. It's like, yeah, but are you, helping them actually get out of the situation that they're in? Or are you making this some sort of like ongoing thing where you feel like, oh, I'm the helper, I'm the charity giver, then it becomes some weird hierarchical thing where it's like, well, I'm the virtuous one and I'm the Superman that's helping out these people who are beneath me, right? And those that understand, who are receiving the help, that understand that, they have a right to be like, okay, this is nice, but how are we actually getting out of this situation, right? Because that's important to think about. Right? But let me continue. Man should not be ready to show that he can live like a badly fed animal. He should decline to live like that and should either steal or go on the rates, which is considered by many to be a form of stealing. As for begging, it is safer to beg than to take, but it is finer to take than to beg. No, a poor man who is ungrateful, unthrifty, discontented, and rebellious is probably a real personality and has much in him. He is at any rate a healthy protest. What did I put in my notes here? Rejecting the current system, right? Acknowledging the system as unjust, right? It's like, I was looking at the system as like, well, what's going on socio-economically? Like, why does hunger exist, period, right? Rather than, hunger is always going to exist. So there needs to be people that always are able to give people food. And, those people are very kind and nice people, which is, there's giving food to people in need. That's, that is a nice, kind thing to do. But, it shouldn't end there, right? And then if you end it there, then it's like, well, is that really, like, are you really like doing this out of the kindness of your heart? If you're just like, oh, I'm just going to give people free food and that's all I'm going to do. It's like, okay, now we need to, like, at a certain point you have to be like, okay, why is this a thing that continues to happen? And what can we do to make it so I don't have to give food to people? Like, what can we do to make it so everybody has food and this constant charity thing doesn't need to happen anymore, right? Then you're really starting to do good, right? But if you don't go that way and you stop at the, I just go every week and get free food, like, then it's becoming like, okay, is this really the best thing that you should be doing, right? Or should you take it to the next level? It is almost credible to me how a man whose life is marred and made hideous by such laws can possibly acquiesce in their continuance, right? And in my notes I put, charity perpetuates poverty, not addresses it. And then you have the systems that are in place, the socioeconomic systems, which are referred to as the non-profit industrial complex, that encourages acquiescence and continuance, right? The state of affairs. An example would be non-profit organizations. There's laws in the books where, like, non-profit organizations can't take a political stance on certain things, right? They're just not allowed to do that. It's like, okay, so they're forced to be apolitical, which means, like, they're forced to not address the core problem, right? That's what he's talking about, these laws. So then you never go into the root cause and actually, like, address the problem in a way that ends it or solves it, right? That's what Wilde is talking about. And then he says here, agitators are a set of interfering, meddling people who come down to some perfectly contented class of the community and sow the seeds of discontent amongst them. That is the reason why agitators are so absolutely necessary. Without them, in our incomplete state, there would be no advance towards civilization. So what is he talking about? These agitators. He's talking about those people that are calling out charity organizations and altruism and neoliberalism, and they're saying this is an industrial complex, this nonprofit organization scheme that's going on. But we gotta focus on mutual aid, solidarity, not charity, right? And that's agitating, right? When you do that, because people, they do their regular voluntary work, they go get their community hours, they feel good, and people say these things like, solidarity, not charity, non-industrial complex, and the person that's giving their community hours, they're like, come on, man, like, why you gotta ruin the mood like that? I was trying to do a good deed, I felt good, and you're just gonna, like, ruin my sense of heroism. It's like, and it's agitating, right? Because it's not enough, right? It's not enough because you're not really addressing the true problem. You're just kind of giving this superficial band-aid solutions. And there's this weird ethical, like moral thing going on where it's, are you really doing this to help people, or are you doing this to prop up your own ego, or like, solidify your status as like a community organizer or like a charity giver, or like, I do good works all the time, I'm a great person, right? I do good. Are you like created this resume where it's like, look at all of the careers I've done. Like, I have worked in the nonprofit industry for several years, and so that makes me a very good person, But if you really think about it, like if it's an industry and you're getting a wage from this, then like how good is it really? Like, is it an exploitative thing? If you gotta start thinking about it like that. Not knocking if everybody needs a wage to live. Unfortunately, we just live in a society where that's a thing that has to happen. That's another thing we should address, right? So I understand, like, you gotta do it, but the whole, like, just walking away feeling good, giving yourself a pat on the back, we did a good job. It's like, that's where Wilde is saying, like, oh, come on, hold on a minute. Like, we need to go further than this. And, and so that's agitating, right? Which is necessary because it motivates people to think more deeply about what they're doing. And I'm all about that. Philosophy, baby. And we go further into this. Let me read you this quote. For the recognition of private property has really harmed individualism and obscured it by confusing a man with what he possesses. It has led individualism entirely astray. It has made gain, not growth, its aim. So that man thought that the important thing was to have. It did not know that the important thing is to be. The true perfection of man lies not in what man has, but in what man is. Right? And yeah, so it's interesting. So he brings up private property. So now he's getting into the socialism aspect of it, right? Which is important point to make. You might think like, oh, he's changing the subject. No, right? Because private properties or like possession. People who are in the charity is like, oh, look at me. I'm giving my possessions to somebody in need. It might even be like, oh, my time. I'm giving my time to somebody in need. That makes me so great. And then you start to identify as like a giver. Like your identity is wrapped into that. And so then you become this, your individuality is wrapped into this whole notion of like, what I possess, I'm giving to somebody else, and that's what makes me great. And then you get the whole warped flip side of that, where somebody who's receiving gets wrapped into that identity. It's like, well, I guess I'm just a person that just has to take from people because I have no possessions, and that makes me less valuable, and I always gotta like take from people, and that's just who I am, right? And we live in this kind of world where Oscar Wilde is saying like, look, it's not about what you have, it's about who you are, right? And it's not even about who you are, it's like what you can be, right? What you can be, right? So we need to start like helping people in ways that go beyond what we can possess or what, the possessions we give. We gotta start helping people by enabling them to be, right? And this is like the concept of mutual aid as opposed to charity. Charity is wrapped up into the idea like, oh, just giving possessions to somebody and that's how you help. Whereas mutual aid is like, we want to enable people to be who they are. We want to enable people to actualize or manifest their being. And, by doing that, by allowing people to do that, you're able to manifest your being instead of being wrapped up in your own possessions. And you're like this weird, like, association of value of like, what I possess is what I'm valuable, what makes me valuable. Right? What I possess is what makes me valuable. Right? So when I give my possessions, that makes me a good person, where it's like, well, is that really the point of all this? And I put in my notes, materialism does not equal individuality. And then he like even starts talking about religion, which is very fascinating, where he starts referring to Jesus Christ, and how, Jesus Christ was basically a minimalist, where he was all about helping the poor, and also he was very anti-materialist. He was like, just give up your possessions, right? You don't need them. Like we just need to help people. But Wilde starts talking about how, look, the reason why Jesus said that was not, he wasn't obsessed with possessions And he wasn't obsessed with this idea like, yeah, you give your possessions to others to help them. He was saying, like, Jesus was saying, you give up your possessions because they're in the way of you being, right? You're getting wrapped up in your possessions. And, you think your possessions are what you are, but they have nothing to do with who you are. So Wilde says here in the text, what Jesus meant was this. He said to man, you have a wonderful personality. Develop it. Be yourself. Don't imagine that your perfection lies in accumulating or possessing external things. Your affection is inside of you. If only you could realize that, you would not want to be rich. Ordinary riches can be stolen from a man. Real riches cannot. In the treasury house of your soul, there are infinitely precious things that may not be taken from you. And so try to so shape your life that external things will not harm you. And try also to get rid of personal property. It involves sordid preoccupation, endless industry, continual wrong. Personal property hinders individualism at every step. So, here, like, Wilde even acknowledges the spirituality of the situation. He's getting kind of Marxist about it, because Marx was all about the whole system of capitalism dehumanizes people because humans become just a means to generate profit or generate capital, and there's no longer this focus on developing yourself as a human being. You're just developing yourself in the service of capital generation, and that's dehumanizing, and it destroys the spirit, right? Or the ability for the spirit to develop. And this is where the socialism comes in, where it even gets religious. But then, I'll just read even further what Wilde says. He says, what Jesus does say is that man reaches his perfection not through what he has, not even through what he does, but entirely through what he is. Hello. Then he continues, you should give up private property. It hinders you from realizing your perfection. It is a drag upon you. It is a burden. Your personality does not need it. It is within you and not outside of you, that you will find what you really are and what you really want. And I agree. So to that end, we go back to like charity. So charity based off of personal possessions, even like giving up personal possessions, that's not truly beneficial for human beings as a whole. Like, of course, like if somebody's starving and that you give them food, and they, because people need food to survive, right? You do that, but it doesn't end there, right? You got to be like, okay, let's put you in a situation where you're not starving continuously, right? Because then once that's happening, then we can focus on you being a human being rather than just, constantly wanting food to survive, to be in the survival mode. But the problem is we have these nonprofit organizations whose kind of whole existence is based off of that mode of being, or people who have to be in that mode of being, right? Like these nonprofit organizations wouldn't exist if that perpetual state of need wasn't there, right? And these nonprofit organizations don't really have the intention to remove that state of being. They need that state of being to be there so that the organization can continue to operate, right? And that's the problem. And then Oscar Wilde gets abolitionist about it, right? I'll read you this quote. A community is infinitely more brutalized by the habitual employment of punishment than it is by the occurrence of crime. It obviously follows that more punishment is inflicted, the more crime is produced. And part of that punishment, I would argue, is the state of, being hungry, or like, food deserts, or like living in communities or societies where access to food is very limited, or access to nutritional food is limited, right? That increases crime, right? Those kinds of things. That kind of habitual punishment. So, I would say that's the kind of punishment to society. You might not think about it like that, but I would say it is. If you want to look at it a different way, you could say habitual need, right? Putting a society or a community in a state of constant need increases crime in that society or community. And, there are businesses that profit off of that kind of state of being. And Wilde is talking about that too. But let me continue reading. Wherever it has really diminished it, the results have always been extremely good. You know, talking about like punitive justice, right? Or punishment. When there's no longer a focus on punishment or like habitual need, where there's more of a focus on mutual aid or like restorative or transformative justice, that's when crime goes down, right? The less punishment, the less crime. When there is no punishment at all, crime will either cease to exist, or if it occurs, will be treated by physicians as a very distressing form of dementia to be cured by care and kindness, right? Restorative justice. For what are called criminals nowadays are not criminals at all. Starvation and not sin is the parent of modern crime. Hello. They are merely what ordinary, respectable, commonplace people would be if they had not got enough to eat. When private property is abolished, here we go, he's making a connection between socialism and abolition. When private property is abolished, there will be no necessity for crime, no demand for it. It will cease to exist, right? There's the whole fiction of like, well, people commit crime because, you know, people are morally inept, right? Or that's not the case. When people are put in desperate situations, people will do desperate things. And it's interesting to think about that in terms of like people who are well off or rich people, because, you know, rich people do crime all the time. There's lots of rich people who do very horrible things. So they're not in need, right? But, you know, Oscar Wilde talks about the spiritual aspect. Yeah, they're in need spiritually, right? And we go back to the whole like solidarity, not charity, where, you know, even rich people are focused too much on possessing. And their possessions is what defines who they are, right? And so they are in this constant need. They're just always trying to get possessions, right? And so that creates crime as well, right? As opposed to like understanding, wait, that's not where happiness truly comes from. Happiness comes from the freedom to be. And this is where Oscar Wilde said, like, look, charity ain't where it's at. It's mutual aid. Because mutual aid is focusing on like, we're trying to get people to a state of being rather than getting people to a state of possession, which is what charity is, right? And it's working both ways. Like even the person that identifies as the giver, as the provider, they're messed up too, right? And so that's the connection Wilde is making. When each member of the community has sufficient for his wants and is not interfered with by his neighbor, it will not be an object of any interest to him to interfere with anyone else. Jealousy, which is an extraordinary source of crime in modern life, is an emotion closely bound up with our conceptions of property. So, you know, each member of the community has sufficient for his wants. So we're talking about community focus, right? Rather than focusing on possessions of property. When that's a focus, then, you know, jealousy starts getting involved, and you're saying that's an extraordinary source of crime. But if we're just focusing on like trying to enable ourselves to be, then that's not going to be an issue. So I think this is a great text. Oscar Wilde's The Soul of Man Under Socialism. I encourage you to check it out. I'm free on the internet. Just Google search it or whatever. And I didn't even get to all the points. You know, and there's also a lot of anarchism where there's rejections of hierarchies. Right? And we kind of talked about that with the whole relationship of the giver and the provider, where like the charity group is above the person receiving, and we got to throw that out the window, and how like rich people are actually do a lot of crime because they're in need too, and the whole possession of property is not addressing the spiritual need. So but there's this false sense of like, well, I'm above everybody, so I don't need to worry about that. Right? And anarchy is like, well, stop thinking about how you're going to be above people by what you possess, and just get rid of that hierarchical thinking, which is like an anarchist principle. Like stop thinking in terms of hierarchy and like being better than somebody and possessing more than somebody or accumulating like more possessions than others, right? So, you know, so that's where he goes into with anarchist thinking. But I only did scratch the surface. You know, my videos are book trailers, they're not book reports. So check it out, The Soul of Man. Oh, The Soul of Man Under Socialism. Well, you've been watching the Black Ponderer. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.